Hello, everyone. The other night on Lords of the Night, the 6-night-a-week live stream show I do with Ranting Monkey and Satsu 2 cents, check the description for details, we looked at a story out of New York regarding their Department of Education. School's Chancellor Richard Carranza accused of demoting admins because they were white. Whiteness has become toxic under school's Chancellor Richard Carranza's regime, insiders charge. At least 4 top Department of Education executives who have been demoted or stripped of duties under Carranza's sweeping reorganization are poised to sue the city, claiming he has created, quote, an environment which is hostile towards whites, unquote, a source told the Post. The women, all white veteran administrators, contend they were pushed aside for less qualified persons of color. Quote, these decisions are being made because Department of Education leadership believes that skin color plays a role in how to get equity, that white people can't convey the message, unquote, said a source familiar with the complaints. There's a toxic whiteness concept going on. Now, that story is obviously very inflammatory, assigning racist motives and intentions to the school's chancellor. It is all allegation and speculation at this point, and lawsuits are being pursued. So, aside from the implications of wrongdoing, there's not much more I can say about it. But what is not accusation or allegation is the amount of money the chancellor has spent and is spending through his new School Climate and Wellness Division, within which lies the Office of Equity and Access. And it is through this office that the Department of Education has set aside $775,000 to contract the Pacific Educational Group to help implement its Courageous Conversations training. The founder and president of Pacific Educational Group is Glenn Singleton. As well, the office has also set aside $175,000 to contract the Disruptive Equity Education Project, whose founder and CEO is Darnisa Amante. So, while we cannot know for sure the Chancellor's thinking on his decision-making, we can, fortunately, find out a little bit about the philosophies that he has spent nearly $1 million of taxpayer money on to have instilled into the Department of Education in New York. So, let's begin with Glenn Singleton of the Pacific Educational Group and a presentation he gave regarding his Courageous Conversation philosophy in 2013. Now, preceding this point in the presentation, Mr. Singleton provided a very long anecdote about his conducting equity training along with the family of a friend of his, which culminates with Mr. Singleton having dinner with this family and interacting with each member. I tell you this only because the way he tells the story doesn't really stop and have a good pause point, so we're going to enter near the end of the story as he begins speaking about his friend's husband. God, I feel like I'm doing exposition at the start of Dune.
And then there is John Linton, the father, the senior, the patriarch. And he's looking at me with what I call, in Courageous Conversation, pre-verbal tension. Meaning he has something he needs to say to me, but he can't quite figure out how to say it. John and I have been having that same conversation up until yesterday in this room. And that's what I believe this is. My possibility in the world is that everybody will be able to talk about race.
Your possibility in the world is that everybody will be able to talk about race. So, there are people in the world unable to talk about race? Or perhaps there are people who are uninterested in making race an issue? Maybe.
And it won't be stressful. It won't cause blame, shame, any of those things. It will just allow us to move forward as human beings.
So our speaker wants talking about race to be an unstressful activity, absent of any kind of blame or shame. Got it.
So last night I'm sitting up in my room and stressed out, CNN's blaring in the background, and I noticed something. I'm like, wow, have you noticed? That if I had a son, he would look like Trayvon.
Trayvon Martin. And we are quoting President Barack Obama when he said,
if I had a son, he'd look like Trayvon.
Okay, got it.
Now hold that moment. Don't go where you normally go.
Where do I normally go? And how exactly do you know what I am thinking again?
Hold yourself. Stop. Remember my possibility.
Yes, your possibility where everyone is able to talk about race without stress or blame or shame coming into the mix. And your opening gambit is to bring up the shooting of Trayvon Martin. Got it.
Many people refer to in the video this compass. And too often, as soon as we hear what's going on, we go to a reactive spot. Don't react. Keep yourself from reacting.
Don't react. Got it.
Also, we go to a thinking spot. Don't think. Keep yourself from deeply thinking.
Don't think. I am not supposed to think too deeply. Got it.
Go to the feeling spot. Go to the believing spot.
Don't react. Don't think. Just feel and believe. This is how we have courageous conversations. Got it.
Back to the feeling spot. Back to the believing spot. And hold yourself in that internal space rather than react externally.
Do you feel hypnotized yet? Because I sure do.
Get in touch with why you're feeling the way you're feeling. And take care of yourself. Because whatever you're feeling, you are supposed to be feeling.
But what if I feel like I should be thinking? And what does any of this have to do with Trayvon Martin?
Now I'm going to put another boundary on that feeling.
Oh, so even though whatever I am feeling is what I am supposed to be feeling, now you're dictating the boundaries of my feelings. Got it.
Do not allow yourself to feel too deeply about anything other than what I just said. That is, don't stroll the history. Don't go way back into the past. Because there is nothing we can do about that. But what you can do is just think about your feelings connected to the fact that if I had a son, he would look like Trayvon, and what that means to you.
So, you're here to tell us what to think about and how to think about it, except we're not supposed to think too deeply about it, and we're certainly not meant to put into context the past events related to that thing. We are instead supposed to feel and believe within your dictated framework. And this is how we have courageous conversations. Got it.
Sankofa simply means embrace the past, but stay focused on the future. Our challenge around race is we continuously bring too much of our past into our present, and it determines our future. We don't have to do that. Our kids are with us right now, and issues are happening every single day that we need to give all of our energy and all of our strength to the present.
The present, of which we should not think too deeply about or try and relate it back to what has come before to draw any wisdom, because the past cannot be changed, so just ignore it. Those are the foundations of having a courageous conversation. All right, well, let's take that and see how courageous conversations are being implemented into school settings today. Let's take a look at a promotion from Pacific Educational Group about a recent leadership retreat they organized.
The reality is we all were human beings before race got created in this society. So how do we create a society that where race is no longer a predictor of who has opportunity, who does not, who is seen as beautiful, who is not, who is seen as intelligent, who is not, whose ways of being have value, whose do not.
Oh, so you want to make race a functional irrelevancy when it comes to the assessment of other people. Well, in all honesty, I can certainly get on board with that idea.
When I was introduced to the Courageous Conversation Protocol, the sense of relief, the sense of freedom, the sense of, my goodness, now I have a way to get this story out that has just been in me as long as I can remember. And not only do I have a way to get my story out, I have a way for our entire school community to hear all of our stories and to really humanize around this thing that has impacted us all, whether we're realizing it or not, whether we're conscious of it or not. And most importantly, we have an opportunity to create that healing empowerment for our young people.
Well, that all sounds great, but what exactly are you talking about?
The Courageous Conversation is saying we all have a racial experience to give a voice to, and how do we really have compassion and understanding for what it means to be conditioned to not see oneself as a racial being, and how does that understanding or how does that belief system that one doesn't even have a racial identity connect to this history of race and racial power, and how do we all become more conscious of it?
So you want to get away from race being such a divisive factor in our society by promoting the virtues of racial identity. Got it.
You know, in my experience as a central office administrator, as a building principal, I always felt like the litmus test of my leadership quality is the degree to which I can hold space for folks to have difficult conversations, necessary conversations, in a way that leaves folks feeling connected versus divided.
Your job is to have difficult conversations meant to bring people together. Difficult conversations about race. Race, which you don't want to be used to define anyone, but which you do want people to identify themselves and identify others with. Got it.
So courageous conversation really is a scaffold and a technology, frankly, that provides for that.
All right, so that is just a taste of where $775,000 of New York taxpayer money is going in order to bring courageous conversations into the school system. But what about the other contract with the Disruptive Equity Education Project? Well, let's take a look at how they present themselves. And just a note that the quality of this original video here is as you see it. For once, this wasn't my having messed up the video rendering.
My name is Dr. Darnisa Monte, CEO and founder of the Disruptive Equity Education Project, or DEEP.
The disruptative?
Disruptive.
Disruptative.
Disruptive.
Yeah, that's not a real word. I think you meant disruptive. But, hey, tell us how you're all about improving education.
Here at DEEP, we're a racial equity consulting firm.
Racial equity consulting firm. So, equity predicated on race. Got it.
That focuses on customizing an experience for individuals, community leaders, and school systems in the kindergarten through 12th grade space where we talk about bias.
You customize experiences regarding bias. Got it.
Stereotype threat.
Stereotype threat. Got it.
Individual purpose in working for equity and advocating for communities, and where we do some planning with teams on how do you even operationalize missions and visions that are focused on equity and diversity and inclusion.
Operationalize missions and visions that are focused on equity, diversity, and inclusion. So you go into schools to train teachers and students to become activists. Got it.
The name of the company, DEEP, is very significant for me because it encapsulates the idea that we're not going to stay at the surface level conversation when we're talking about equity, diversity, and inclusion. That we're intentionally digging deep into ourselves to surface those issues that maybe we've never surfaced before, and we're going to look in the mirror in order to discover why this work matters and why we care about it.
So, looking deep to show everyone how biased they really are and how much they are really feeding stereotypes, whether they know it or not, whether they actually are or not. Got it.
So one of the things that I really love about our company is actually our logo and how much of our kind of spirit and approach that it encompasses.
One of the things you love about your company is the logo. Got it.
So the idea that we can literally flip it on its head, and that as we encourage people to dig deeper, we are doing that because that is how you grow. So the idea that the deeper you dig, the deeper those roots go, the more you can grow as a person. So I really think that our logo does a good job of showing that disruptive nature and of capturing that ability to flip things on their heads and look at them a little bit differently.
Look at things differently? Or look at things the way you tell people to look at them? Because it sure sounds like you're approaching these situations with a presumption of how people are already thinking, and that you possess a better way of thinking.
Our 6-month transformative experience will take you there into places you never thought you could go with equity. We're so excited to partner with you. We're excited to hear your stories, and we're excited to help you figure out how to make Deep work for you.
All right, well, there's the company-produced promotion. But how does our founder and CEO fare in laying out her case for Deep in an interview? Well, let's take a look at that.
Schools across America face an increasingly diverse student population, while deep-seated institutional biases endure. Today's guest argues that successful leaders who dig deep and unpack their own experiences with race and bias can help tear down the barriers of institutional racism. She's Darnisa Amante this week on Story in the Public Square.
Huh. You sure use the word deep a lot in there. How very, very clever. But let's get on to the interview.
So you talk about changing mindsets around equity and dismantling systemic oppression and racism. It's a big challenge, clearly. Talk about systemic oppression. What do you mean when you use that term?
So when I think of systemic oppression, I think that's a great question. The way that I tend to think about it are the overlapping of different institutions and structures. So it's really the combination of multiple sectors that are creating policies and practices that are oppressing or marginalizing people.
Ah, intersectionality. The art of piling up a multitude of molehills and calling it an erupting volcano.
And it's not only because of race. Inequity is as broad as it is specific.
Inequity is as broad as it is specific. I have no idea what that means.
But it was really thinking about what are the systems in this country? What are the policies in this country? What are the ways in which we think about groups, right? Our own bias that contribute to us creating more policies and more practices that just continue to oppress and marginalize people. And the oppression for me is maybe not being seen in your own identity, having people not believe your lived experiences when you share them. Oppression could be wanting to have access to opportunities and resources, and there's a physical barrier there that prevents you from doing what you believe you must do.
A physical barrier. A physical barrier preventing you from doing what you believe you must do. And what does this force field look like, I wonder? But also, one of her oppressions is not believing her lived experience. Well, I will keep that in mind as we proceed.
And so I think about it on all those different levels.
So that applies to all races. I'm assuming from white to African American to Latino to Asian American and also immigrants. I know you research and do some work with immigrants. I mean, those people would fit in that category as well, would they not?
Yes. And I think that's the way I think about equity almost in two different levels. And I think it's important to make the distinction. The first one is that oppression and systemic oppression, I believe, comes for all of us. I don't think anyone's free from it. But I think the way you live, the way in which you've been oppressed can look different for different groups. So I think about socioeconomic status. Here at Deep, we're a racial equity consulting firm. I think about ableism. Here at Deep, we're a racial equity consulting firm. I think about non-able-bodied communities, right? Those who have invisible and visible disabilities. I'm thinking about gender. Here at Deep, we're a racial equity consulting firm. The fact that gender is not a binary, but a lot of our ideology tells us it is, right?
Gender is not binary. Our ideology tells us it is. And this is someone who is getting paid $175,000 to improve New York's Department of Education. Got it.
So those are the type of inequities broadly, as well as citizenship, right? Your status in this country. But then there's something called racial equity. And this is where the distinction happens. I can understand that all these inequities are happening, but the minute you intersect inequity with race, something happens.
Something happens. Ooh, sounds ominous. Something like...
And I know a lot of people say, if race is a social construct, if we made it up, why should you give value to it? Why should you talk about it?
Gender is not a binary, and race is a social construct. All of this coming from someone being paid $175,000 of New York taxpayer money to improve the education system. Got it.
And the real reason is if we don't talk about it, you can't understand my lived experiences in the world.
Yes. Unless you look at someone in terms of their skin color, first and foremost, you will never understand who they are. Because race, after all, is an identity. Got it.
So I think of equity as more, right? And I know this is a harder part of the conversation because equity feels very fixed, right? We do have a fixed table. I wish we could invite everyone to the table, but the way I like to think of it is equity is understanding, first, that there are systems of oppression, and that those systems create policies and practices that make it impossible for certain groups to achieve or to be as successful without support. It doesn't mean communities of color are lazy. It doesn't mean that we want a handout. It just means that there are real institutions that we do not have systemic power to dismantle.
Can you give us an example?
Yes. Please do give us examples of institutions, systems, or policies which actively oppress you. I am all ears.
Yeah, so I think of, there's so many.
Why are you hesitating? If there are so many, then it should not be at all difficult to name a few.
I wish there weren't so many. So I'm speaking from a personal lived experience.
Oh, a personal lived experience. And as we have been told, to doubt any of your personal lived experiences inherently oppresses you. Proceed.
One of those examples I'll start with is ideology, right? It's just the belief that certain people have about Black communities. And so there's a very pervasive belief, and I wouldn't say it's beyond the United States, I can't speak globally, but at least here, that Black women are angry.
Is that a belief, or is that a stereotype? Because you framed it as a belief that certain people have about Black communities. So, I thought that part of your program was to address stereotype threat.
Where we talk about bias, stereotype threat.
So, is it that everyone else is susceptible to stereotype threat, but you are not?
That we're aggressive, that we can't be vulnerable. And so any way that I present, I have to show up always genteel, in a very calm voice, even though I might not be angry. The perception of my voice when I'm excited could get me fired.
The perception of your voice could get you fired. Well, if you say so. I mean, this is your lived experience after all. I'm sure that if you were ever fired from a job in the past, it was entirely due to your voice.
Another one is my hair. So for everyone on the show, you can see my hair is pretty long. And so I found that a part of that ideology has often lifted up that hair should be straight, that the most beautiful hair is normally sleek and it's smooth.
Sleek and smooth hair being attractive is an element of an ideology. Everyone thinks this. It is not a matter of personal style or personal preference. Got it.
And so people who have curly hair, or people who have hair like mine, which is locked or just natural, my hair's got some volume to it. I know they slicked it back a little bit today, but it's usually got some volume on it. And because it's so different, because we've been taught that beautiful hair is straight, people touch me all the time. They touch my hair all the time, daily.
People touch your hair daily. Got it.
You mean like strangers?
Strangers? Okay, planes, trains, automobiles.
Really?
Walking, power walking and jogging.
Strangers touch your hair on planes, trains, and automobiles. Strangers run up to you while you're power walking or jogging just to touch your hair. Daily. Well, if you say so, I mean, it is your lived experience.
I have run a half marathon and had somebody run their full hand through my hair while running a half marathon. Okay, so it's not because people are bad people. It's because we don't actually know that to do that could be hurtful to me.
Everyone, everywhere, does not know not to touch your hair without your permission. Daily. Got it.
And so how does this turn into systemic policy and practice?
Yes, how does everyone having no concept of personal space when it comes to your hair turn into policy and practice? I am dying to know this.
There's now law in the country as of last year that says that I can be fired from a job for having hair like this.
Oh, what?
Really?
It is a real policy in this country that says that hair is a choice. And that if I choose to wear my hair like this, then I am essentially choosing to not have a job should my employer not want it. And that is fully legal.
Okay, I must be missing something. First off, yes. A case brought before the 11th District Court of Appeals in 2016 argued that a woman denied a job offer due to her dreadlocks was an example of racial discrimination. So the question before the court became, is hairstyle inherently an aspect of race and thus protected by equal employment laws? And to be clear, the court had to consider hairstyles as a matter of law, not the specific hairstyle at question in the originating case, i.e. dreadlocks, which was just a matter of fact. And the appeals court agreed with the lower court's dismissal that hairstyle is not an immutable aspect of race, and thus denying someone employment on the basis of hairstyle is not a violation of one's rights. Now, this case is probably on its way to the Supreme Court for a final ruling, but sorry. I'm very sorry, but what does any of that have to do with people wanting to touch your hair? And see, this is where I'm confused. How does that case in any way track from our speaker's lived experience? How does a conspicuous lack of self-control on the part of people wanting to touch our speaker's hair daily thus lead to an employer denying someone a job due to their dreadlocks because it did not conform with dress code policy? Well, I'll answer that question for you. It doesn't. But this is our speaker's premier example of a system of oppression out of an untold number of possible examples.
Can you give us an example?
Yeah, so I think of, there's so many.
And this is also the kind of expertise that Richard Carranza is shelling out $950,000 to instill within the New York City Department of Education. That educators need to stop thinking too deeply and to just feel. To stop reacting and just believe. That the way to bring unity outside of race is to promote race as an identity. That gender is not a binary, and that race is a social construct. And that the sound of your voice and people wanting to touch your hair means that you'll be fired because you happen to be black. $950,000. Man, where else can you make that kind of money talking convoluted nonsense? Oh, right.
Right?
As always, thank you for watching.